All right, first of all, I just wanted to point out that I post a lot of stuff to my community page, probably about 3 times as much as I do videos. So if you're missing that for any reason, just go to my channel page and click on the community tab, and you'll see all my community posts there. And there's just a lot of more up-to-date information because I don't always do videos. Sometimes I just don't feel like it, and I just do a quick community post. Now, there were a couple of diagrams that I posted only in community posts, and I don't believe I ever really discussed them in a video, so let me just go over those real fast. So there was this one, and what we're looking at here is this really nice, perfectly symmetrical structure linking these significant dates. Dates that had either significant signs or significant celestial events. And as you can see, those events haven't been random. They're all pivoting around this center date, which is Kislev 24, not the official Jewish date, but the Enochian Kislev 24. And when I say Enochian, I'm referring to this unique calendar that we've been using in the last, for all of my work, for like the last 5 or 6 videos, that has nothing to do with, well, it's sort of related to, but it's not exactly the same thing as the calendar that's described in the book of Enoch. So when I say Enochian, I don't mean that. This is a little different. You're not going to really find it anywhere online other than here or the channel where I got it from, which is Tabernacle of the Bridegroom. So I just wanted to point that out real fast. If you really want to know how that calendar works, why we use it, just go to my video titled, let's think, it's this one here, the South Wind Blew Twice, about the 51-minute mark. I discussed this calendar system. But anyway, so Kislev 24 on this quote-unquote Enochian calendar, which is the date mentioned in Haggai 2:10, that corresponds to the Gregorian date of January 11th. And that is the center point of this structure here that everything pivots around. So everything on the left is mirrored on the right. And then you've got these repeated 74-day spans of time. And in simple English ordinal gematria, Jesus equals 74. So Jesus is all over this diagram here. And this is definitely by design. This is not by chance. So on the extreme left, you've got the wedding ring eclipse on October 14th, and that is mirrored to the Enochian New Year on the extreme right here. And then you've got the partial lunar eclipse that was on October 29th, and then the partial lunar eclipse on March 25th. And then it gets more interesting towards the middle here, because these are not just eclipses over here. These are actually events, celestial events, or prophetic events. So on December 27th going into the 28th, we had the 276 sign, which is another, it's a sign that happened at the end of 2023 that signals the end of the church age. If you don't know what that is, you can watch that same video I just pointed at. I think it's described pretty well at the very beginning of it. But that sign is mirrored to the completion of the dedication of the temple, which we went over in previous videos. The temple being us, right? Not any building in Jerusalem. So that happened towards the middle of January, and it ended on January 25th going into the 26th. Well, I should just say it ended on the 26th. So because the 26th was the great eighth day of that process, right? There was 7 days of dedication, and then followed by 7 days of Sukkot, and then there was an 8th day. So it was like 14 days plus the 15th day, and the 8th day they had a solemn assembly. And all of that follows the template established when Solomon dedicated the first temple, and that's described in 1 Kings chapter 8 and 2 Chronicles chapter 7. But for me personally, the most amazing thing that emerges from this diagram is this symmetry here of, on the left, we've got Heshvan 17, in other words, the 17th day of the pre-Exodus second month. So that's stated in Genesis 7:11, 17th day of the second month. And that corresponds to Gregorian 12:5. And the date that's mirrored on this chart with that date happens to be February 17th, which is, in Gregorian terms, the 17th day of the second month. In other words, the 17th day of the second Gregorian month. which is found in Genesis 7:11, just like Heshbon 17. And I found that really, truly awesome. How can this be? That can't happen randomly, right? And so that tells you that this chart is everything that's shown in this chart is by design. So that was pretty awesome to me. Now, another thing I had added to this chart was I overlaid here on the bottom the Acts ship voyage timeline. Actually, not just the ship voyage, but the entire timeline in red here. So it begins at the Day of Atonement, and then they depart the next day on the ship. And then that ship voyage ends when they cross the Strait of Messina over here. And then they've got, then they arrive at Puteoli and tarry there for 7 days. And then the 8th day they depart for Rome. And that's the Acts 27 and 28 timeline. And that's the maximum extent of it as well, because it's bounded on both sides by temporal ambiguity. In other words, prior to the Day of Atonement, there's no time information. You have no way to establish when you are. Same thing with after the day where they depart Puteoli for Rome. Well, at that point, they just walk on foot on the Appian Way towards Rome to meet up with people at 3 taverns or something like that. But they don't tell you how long it takes them, or how long they take to walk that 150 odd miles to that point. So this 119-day stretch of time constitutes the Acts 27 and 28 timeline. And it's also no surprise or no accident that it's 119 days, given that, as I've stated in past videos, the number 119 is very strongly associated with the book of Acts in many, many ways. That number pops up all over the numerics of the book of Acts. Okay, so that pretty much covers it for this diagram. And the next one is, let me zoom in a little bit. So what this is showing here are these 2 dates, February 17th and February 24th, which correspond to significant events in the Acts voyage narrative. The first one being crossing the Strait of Messina, which was 110 days since the start of the voyage. And the second date is the end of the tarrying at Puteoli, the 7-day tarry at Puteoli. So this is like the last day, the 7th day. And that's 117 days since the start of the voyage. So what I was trying to show with this diagram is that these 2 events from the Acts ship voyage timeline, which we thought of as sort of candidate events for when potentially the rapture might occur, ended up landing on these 2 dates, February 17th and February 24th. And those 2 dates ended up not being just these sort of random, meaningless dates, but rather being meaningfully connected to the surrounding celestial context. And what do I mean by that? Well, take a look at February 17th. It's exactly the midpoint date between the 276 sign and the second great American eclipse. So what are the odds of that happening by chance? And then the other date we were looking at, and still are looking at, is the exact midpoint between January 11th, which is, aka Kislev 24, which was that massive solar and lunar eclipse midpoint. It's the exact midpoint between that date and the second great American eclipse, with 44 days on either side. So that's also rather unlikely. And something I noticed when I was looking at scripture, because this goes from Kislev 24, and from Kislev 24 it's 44 days to February 24th. And then you have the verse Matthew 24:44, therefore be ye also ready, for in such an hour as ye think not, the Son of Man cometh. So the chapter and verse number there is 24:44. So could that be a hint from God from Kislev 24, 44 days, right, to February 24th? Okay, so now let's take a look at the Acts ship voyage timeline and see where we are. So for anybody who hasn't seen the spreadsheet, this is just what we've been using to map the timeline of the Acts 27-28 ship voyage to the current calendar. The column on the left is a Gregorian date. The next column over is this quote-unquote Enochian date. Now, they look like Jewish dates, but don't try looking for them on Hebcal or Torah calendar, because that's totally different. This is this wacky Enochian calendar that we're using that I described earlier. And the reason we're using it, by the way, is because it maps perfectly to all these events. Like if you take a look at the dates in Haggai, the book of Haggai, it mentions dates like in Haggai 1:1 it mentions the first day of the 6th month, and in Haggai 2:10 mentions the 24th day of the 9th month. And these dates mentioned in Haggai map perfectly using this Enochian calendar to actual celestial events in the sky, right? So this mapping maps, for instance, the first day of the 6th month to September 19th. And we all know what that was. That was the child asteroid Revelation 12 sign. And then this mapping maps the 24th day of the 9th month, aka Kislev 24, to January 11th. And that was that significant lunar and solar eclipse midpoint date. And temple dedication festival that happened to begin exactly 38 weeks into this Enochian calendar year. And, you know, Hanukkah in simple Hebrew gematria equals 38, and Hanukkah means dedication. So there were just a million little things like that, which we've gone over in past videos. And that gives us a lot of confidence that this is the correct calendar to use. So I'll just mention quickly that between the Gregorian calendar of this year and the Enochian calendar of this year, there is this 110-day delta, or difference. And that'll come into play later. So I just wanted to mention that real fast. But let's get back to that ship voyage timeline. So the south wind blows twice, at the beginning of the ship voyage and at the end, and both happens to be in verse 13. And both of those times when the south wind blows happens to occur on dates that reduce to 13. So the first time it happens is a Gregorian 1030, in other words, October 30th, which reduces to 13 if you drop the zeros. And then the second time the south wind blows, also from verse 13, happens to be on the Enochian 1030, in other words, Tevet 30. And so that date also likewise reduces to 13. So the fact that both of those events, which are described in verses in verses that have verse numbers of 13, happen to align to the dates of that reduce to 13, one being the Gregorian and one being the Enochian. There's this nice symmetry going on there, and so that gives us confidence that this is correctly aligned. Another reason would be that the day that they crossed the Strait of Messina, that's actually found in Acts 28:13, like I said, and that verse, if you read it, actually describes two events. So it describes that day and the day just before, like the day prior, where they're spending the day at Regium. And so those 2 days that are described in this verse happen to be the third month and 18th day since the start of the voyage, and the third month and 19th day since the start of the voyage. And so that's like 3189 if you were to write it, like 3189 like that. And that verse also just happens to be the 3189th verse from the end of the Bible. So that was another pretty astonishing confirmation that we're correctly aligned here. And another thing is that if you look at the dates starting at the Puteoli Terry, so right around here on Shavat 1, there's this like reflective date pattern that emerges, which we've encountered something like this before when we were trying to confirm our timeline. When we were looking at the dedication festival that occurred back in January. There was a similar sort of reflective date pattern that emerged that looked like a menorah. So we've used this sort of confirmation technique in the past, but this emerges here. In this case, what it is on Shavat 1, which has this date signature of 11-1, which is like a 111, also happens to be the 111th day since the start of the voyage. So you have, and then the next day would be a 112 signature, and that would be the 112th day since the start of the voyage. So that's another little hint that lets us know that we are correctly aligned. And there's just a million of these little things, but I thought I'd just mention the big ones. Like, I'll just mention a little one real fast. For instance, the verse Acts 27:13. That's the first time the south wind blows, corresponding to the day that they actually left, the day that the ship voyage began. The Greek gematria, ordinal gematria for that is 1017, which reduces to 117. And that, of course, occurred on 7/11, Tishri 11, which is like a reversed 117. So that's just an example of little minor confirmations that occur all the time. But I've seen so many of these that really give me a lot of reassurance that we're, correctly aligned here. So that being the case, so we have come. So the Strait of Messina crossing has come and gone. That was on February 17th. We were hoping for the rapture then. Didn't happen. So now we're looking at the other date that we mentioned in that video, which was 7 days later. That's this date right here. The 7th day of the tarrying at Puteoli. So I'm thinking it's either that day or the day after where they depart Puteoli for Rome, which is the final entry in this entire timeline. So it's either going to be the 24th or the 25th, corresponding to Shavat 7 or Shavat 8. And on the official Jewish calendar, it's Adar, I think 15 and 16. I don't remember. So that's interesting, yeah. And that's the 310th Enochian day of the year and 55th Gregorian day of the year with 300 days remaining. And then the next day is the 311th Enochian day of the year, and on the Gregorian side, it's got 310 days remaining. And I noticed that it seems to cross there. You see how that happens? It's like going on the Enochian side from the 310th to the 311th. And on the Gregorian, it's going from the 311 days remaining to 310 days remaining. Some kind of intersection going on there. And I found that curious, and I realized why that's happening. Because it's the 55th Gregorian day of the year, and if you remember before, I mentioned that there's this 110-day delta between the Enochian and Gregorian calendars. And 110 divided by 2 is 55. And I noticed something else pretty amazing that results from this. So here I drew up this diagram to try to visualize it, but it's not really easy to understand. But so that date, which is Shavat 7, which is 11/7, Enochian, February 24th, and like it showed in the spreadsheet, that's the 55th day of the year. So that's 55 days after New Year's. If you extend that 55 days before New Year's, that happens to land on November 7th, which is 11/7 Gregorian. So it just also happens to have this 11/7 date signature. It's just one is using the Enochian calendar and the other one's using the Gregorian calendar. And that span there is exactly the same as, this 110 days that keeps popping up, which is the exact delta between 2023 and 24's Enochian and Gregorian calendars. It's also the exact duration of the Acts ship voyage. Not the entire voyage, but just the seafaring part. And so this number keeps popping up. 11/7 or 7/11. And I created this diagram to sort of show all the places it pops up. So you've got the start of the ship voyage occurring on Tishri 11, which is 7/11, Enochian, okay? And then the ship voyage ends on February 17th, which is, 17th day of the second month, which is sort of pointing to Genesis 7/11. And then this last day of tarrying at Puteoli is on Shavat 7, which is 11/7. So 117 there. And then from the start of the ship voyage to that last day of tarrying, so that from the start of the ship voyage on 7/11 to the last day of tarrying at Puteoli on 11/7 happens to be 117 days. And then to top it all off, that final date of 11/7 has this weird connection through this calendar to a mirror date of 11/7 Gregorian. I guess that's how I can say it. So So this number keeps popping out. So let's talk about this number. What does it actually mean? Most of you probably know this stuff already, but I'll just mention it for anybody who happens to not know what that number means. So 117 or 711 refers to separation or division, and also the flood of Noah. So for instance, in Genesis 7:11, that's the verse where the flood begins. The flood of Noah begins. In Genesis 11:7, that's the verse where God mixes up the languages of men, thereby dividing them into the nations. That's a type of division there, separation. In Hebrews 11:7, Paul mentions Noah and the flood. And then, of course, Psalms 117 is the middle chapter of the Bible. So in that sense, it divides the Bible. And then Noah is mentioned twice in the Gospels, once in Matthew 24:37, and then again in Luke 17:26. Now, if you subtract 17:26 from 24:37, you get 7:11. That's definitely not an accident. That's how God created His Word. It's like filled with numbers and meaning. And then in Song of Solomon 8:14, the verse where it's talking about "Come away with me, my beloved," that's the 117th verse of that book, and we know that verse is referring to the rapture. So that's a type of separation as well. So there we go. That's what all these 117s and 711s are all about. So it's really talking about separation and division, dividing the peoples from the peoples, separating the light from the darkness, separating the believer from the unbeliever. And that appears to be imminent. And there was another thing that I had mentioned in past videos, this riddle in Haggai 2 verse 16, and I proposed that this riddle is pointing to Tevet 30. Okay, so I'll just go over that again. That's since those days were when one came to a heap of 20 measures, there were but 10. When one came to the press vat for to draw out 50 vessels out of the press, there were but 20. So I looked at the numbers involved. We have a 20 and a 10, and then a 50 and a 20. So I just subtracted them. 20 minus 10 is 10. 50 minus 20 is 30. And got out of that 1030. And then I figured, well, maybe that's referring to Tevet 30. On the calendar here. Excuse me, on the spreadsheet here. That's right here. That's the day where that's February 17th, where they crossed the street of Messina. So what I realized today was, or actually yesterday, if that verse, Haggai 2:16, is pointing to 10:30 or Tevet 30, and then, that means Haggai 2:23 is pointing to Shabbat 7 or February 24th, because you just have to line them up. So Haggai 2:16 pointing to Tevet 30, and then Haggai 2:17 the next day the next verse pointing to the next day, which is Shabbat 1. And on down the line, you get to Haggai 2:23, the verse where Zerubbabel is taken, and that's pointing to Shabbat 7, which is February 24th. So that's pretty exciting. And another thing I realized also is that the preceding verse here, Haggai 2:15, states, "And now I pray you, consider from this day and upward, from before a stone was laid upon a stone in the temple of the Lord." And then it says, "Since those days were," okay, so in this verse. So in other words, the preceding verse is referring to the temple. So I thought also that it's therefore interesting, because if you take those numbers, instead of just subtracting them, you just reduce numbers. So it's like instead of the 20 minus 10 is 10, you just reduce the 20 and the 10. That becomes 21. Like, I'll just put it here. That becomes 21. And then the other number becomes, it's 50, and the 20 becomes 52. Well, that's interesting because it mentions the temple in conjunction with this riddle, that if you go 21 days back from Tevet 30, you land at the end of the temple dedication festival. And if you go 52 days back from Tevet 30, you land on December 27th, which is the 276 sign, which is not really obviously related to the temple dedication festival, but it is connected symmetrically. Let's see. Yeah, in this diagram to that, because if you remember, the temple dedication completion date was the 26th, and he sent the people home in the next day on the 27th, and then that's exactly mirroring the 276 sign. It's like 14 days on either side of Kislev 24. So yeah, there's that. And then another thing that's interesting, which is also in Haggai, and I mentioned this in a community post, but Brother G44 pointed this out to me. If you notice in Haggai, I think I might have mentioned this in the video because I'm getting deja vu, but in case I haven't, I'll mention it again. If you look at Haggai, let me just pull it up real fast. Chapter 2, verse 20. Yes, it says, "And again the word of the Lord came unto Haggai in the 24th day of the month, saying, Speak to Zerubbabel." And then it ends that in Haggai 2:23 when it says, "In that day, saith the Lord of hosts, will I take thee, Zerubbabel." So we would be taken because we're Zerubbabel on that day, and that day is referring back to verse 20, which is the 24th day of the month. Now, what Brother G44 pointed out, which was extremely interesting, is that suspiciously the actual month there is missing, whereas it's not missing in verse 10, where it says in the 24th day of the 9th month. It's explicitly referenced there. And I think another one, yeah, verse 18, it also says from the 24th day of the 9th month. But here all of a sudden in verse 20, the Holy Spirit decides to leave the name of the month out. So that means that technically that verse could refer to the 24th day of any month, even a month in a different calendar system. In other words, it could refer to the 24th day of February as being the day that Zerubbabel is taken. So got a lot of stuff pointing to February 24th here, Shabbat 7, because that would be the 24th day of the month, the undefined month, which could be February. And then we've got this riddle here also potentially pointing to that day. And then a whole bunch of other stuff as well, like the Acts ship voyage timeline. And finally, that day, as most people know, is full moon. And it's a full snow moon. That's what this particular moon is called, a full snow moon. Which, of course, brings to mind the book of Jasher. Let me see if I can find it here. Jasher. Book of Jasher, chapter 3. And so the context here is that Enoch has just been raptured into heaven. And I'll just start reading here at verse 37. "And on the 8th day, all the kings that had been with Enoch sent to bring back the number of men that were with Enoch in that place from which he had ascended into heaven. And all those kings went to the place, and they found the earth there filled with snow, and upon the snow were large stones of snow. And one said to the other, Come, let us break through the snow and see. Perhaps the men that remained with Enoch are dead, and are now under the stones of snow. And they searched, but could not find him, for he had ascended into heaven." So yeah, that could be a little hint to the rapture in the current day occurring in the month of the snow moon, or around the time of the snow moon. And yeah, isn't that interesting that that's Book of Jasher, chapter 3, 38, right? And Psalms 83:3, in other words, the reverse of 338, is, "They have taken crafty counsel against thy people and consulted against thy hidden ones." So, and this is the only verse in the entire Bible, by the way, that contains that expression, hidden ones. So isn't that interesting? And I think Trump also got fined recently, right? Trump, 83.3 million fined in this judgment against him in this defamation civil suit by this writer, E. Jean Carroll. 83.3 million. And then after that, I think he got fined again recently, a couple days back. Yeah, so here we go. Trump was ordered to pay $354 million in fines from this fraud case decision. And 354 is a huge rapture-related biblical number. Well, first of all, we are currently in the 354th Shemitah since Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy began in 457 BC. So that's the first thing. And the next thing is that I believe Strong's 354... Greek Strong's 354 is a taking up. Obvious rapture reference there. And then Strong's Hebrew 354 is, I think, more well known. That's a hart, stag, or deer. I think it's also translated as gazelle in a couple of places. One of the most well known verses to use Strong's Hebrew 354 is in Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verses 8 and 9. The voice of my beloved, behold, he cometh leaping upon the mountains, skipping upon the hills. My beloved is like a roe or young hart. So that's your Strong's Hebrew 354 right there. It's like a roe or a young hart or stag or deer or whatever, right? Behold, he standeth behind our wall. Okay, so the young hart or deer or stag, Strong's H354 comes leaping upon the mountain. So it's like leaping stag, right? And well, first of all, it's a leap year, so that's interesting. But notice what it says in this article here. So we have the 354, which refers to Strong's Hebrew 354, stag. And then what the judge says is interesting. He said the frauds in the case, quote, leap off the page and shock the conscience. So I saw that. I immediately laughed. It's definitely a very Balaamic statement there by the judge, as Gary over at Unsealed would say, and that is referring, of course, to Balaam's donkey being forced to talk. So I think it's just something that I think God ordained this judge to say. Hey, I didn't Supernatural by Design's channel mentioned something about that. I think it was like the tribe of Naphtali, and I think it was their official animal or something, or their traditional animal is the stag. I'm zoom in a little bit here. Traditional symbols for Naphtali include the deer, hind, gazelle, or stag, and sometimes feature a fruit basket. Well, that's interesting because in light of the basket of summer fruit from Amos 8. But anyway, it also says Naphtali is the tribe associated with the Hebrew month Adar. So we've got the stag pointing to the tribe of Naphtali, whose month is Adar. And we're currently in a leap year. So in a leap year, I believe, let's see, leap Adar. It says, yeah, a leap year has months Adar 1 and Adar 2. Adar 1 is considered to be the extra inserted month. Okay, so Adar 1 is leap Adar. So the leaping stag is a pointer to Adar 1. And this, by the way, is not the Enochian calendar. This is the official Jewish calendar. And Adar 1 is the current month. I think February 24th is like Adar 1:15 or something like that. So yeah, even that leaping stag symbolism is pointing to this month, which is amazing. And another thing that happened recently, which I mentioned in a community post, this was pointed out to me by Sister Jody, was that evidently an oil tanker with the name of Pollux was attacked by the Houthis in a missile attack. And I just about fell out of my chair when I heard that. What are the odds, anytime actually, but now of all times, that a big international news story appears having the word Pollux in it? Go figure. So that's an extremely amazing coincidence. And on top of that, it just happens to occur when, according to our timeline, Paul is ending his ship voyage in a ship that contains a sign of Castor and Pollux. Happened the same day. So that is way, way beyond coincidence at this point. And another thing that's interesting about that, okay, so that happened in, so Castor and Pollux is mentioned in Acts 28:11. Right here, 28:11, which had wintered in the isle, whose sign was Castor and Pollux. And if you look at our calendar with the Enochian dates, okay, so Heshvan 17 is the date that the flood started, and that course, this Enochian Heshvan 17 corresponds to 12/5, December 5th. Now, if you go back from there 7 days to when they got the warning, the 7-day warning, and they boarded the ark, that's Heshvan 10. That would correspond to November 28, which is 11:28. And that verse that mentions Castor and Pollux is 28:11. So I reasoned, therefore, and I put this in a community post, that maybe that incident with the Houthi missile attack on a ship named Pollux, which references that Acts 28:11, is kind of like a 7-day warning, the 7-day flood warning, because of the similarity between that chapter and verse number 28:11 to that date of 11:28 that Enochian Heshvan 10 falls on. So if that's the case, that also points to February 24th, because 2/17, February 17th was when that attack happened. So 7 days later is February 24th. So just add that to the little pile of clues that we have for February 24th. Yeah, so that's pretty much all I've got at the moment. I think that we're looking at extremely high watch days on the 24th and 25th of February, corresponding to day 7 of the tarry at Puteoli and the day after, which is when they depart Puteoli for Rome. So that's a Saturday and a Sunday. I don't know which day the rapture would be on. My guess it would be like the 24th in the Americas, in the West, and then in the Far East in Australia, the 25th. So, but we will find out. And if those days should happen to pass, then I'm really not sure, because at that point there is no, like I mentioned earlier, there's no way to tell what day you're on after that point. That's the end of any kind of intelligible time indicators. It just says that they just basically leave Rome on foot at that point, walking the Appian Way towards Rome, and they meet brethren at 3 taverns, if I recall correctly. And that's like that could be up to a week. So if God doesn't rapture us on the 24th or the 25th, then it's because he wants to introduce an element of randomness into the rapture date. And you could use that part of the narrative to do so. So I really don't know, but yeah, that's what I got. So it's looking really good. And as I make this video, events seem to be heating up, because I just see this in my Twitter feed. It says developing World War III watch: Houthis sink British ship in Red Sea, shoot down U.S. Reaper drone, attack 2 U.S. ships in the Gulf of Aden. So that looks like a significant escalation, and we are definitely getting closer by the day, by the hour even, to World War III. So events in the world seem to be matching, all of our Watchmen abstractions. So that's it, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you guys have any interesting comments or information, definitely leave me a comment, And yeah, thanks again. God bless.